I remember sitting in my classroom in Kettering, Ohio, and our teacher that year was teaching us history for the first time and was telling us about what happened during World War II. And also, because of my parents, they came from Europe, and my father fled from both the Nazis and the communists and lost everything he had. And I was right at that age where all of this was sinking in. And I remember sitting in my classroom praying silently to God, Lord, if anything like this were to ever happen here in the United States, I promise to you I will do everything I can to take a stand and to make a difference regardless of the cost. And years later, of course, working for the government as the Europe and Middle East trade specialist, I traveled a lot overseas, worked with our foreign embassies very closely for usually several days at a time in the area of international trade. And from some of these people began hearing talk about this move toward a global government through an empowered United Nations that someday would become a type of world government. At least that's how many of these people saw it. And I asked a lot of seemingly naive questions. I wanted to find out where they were coming from and where all of this was going. And one thing led to another. And then finally I felt, you know, Lord, are you taking me up on that promise I made back in 6th grade? Am I supposed to do something with this information? And if so, where do I begin? And the doors began opening up within a few weeks, literally, as I was asked to.
You found out something about the monies
yes.
of the world. Explain that.
Well, in February of 1984, I was invited to tour a company in Indianapolis, my hometown, that was to receive the contract from the U.S. Treasury Department to build the new printing presses that would be printing the new U.S. currency. And they already had a prototype machine built at that time. And so I asked the gentleman there a lot of questions regarding this new currency, what it was to look like, the purpose behind it. And to make a long story short, I discovered that new currencies were coming out all around the world. They had very similar features. It would make the tracking of the currencies possible and eventually result in a single global currency system. So this was just the next step before we have a completely unified system. But as I said, this was back in 1984. And in the mid-1990s is when the new currency actually began coming out in the United States. So this was in the making for many years before it actually happened.
So what it appears to me